Hello there, my sleepy fellows. Tonight, we'll journey together through the quiet corners of Middle-earth, where moonlight softens the hills and ancient whispers linger in the breeze. The evening settles over the Shire, cloaking its rolling hills in a blanket of twilight. Tiny lights flicker in round windows, warm and welcoming, as hobbits tuck into their feathered beds. The soft hum of nature fills the air, the gentle chirp of crickets, the distant murmur of the Brandywine River, and the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by a cool night breeze. Tonight, we'll follow the path of an old mystery, one whispered in the firelight of many a hobbit's hearth. The tale of the Arkenstone, a gem of unmatched beauty and power, and the question it left behind. What might have been had its light been seen not as a prize, but as a guide? This is the story of the Arkenstone, the heart of the mountain, a gem so radiant it seemed to hold the very light of the stars within its many facets. To many, it was a prize, sought by kings and fought over by armies. But there is another tale, quieter and older, one often overlooked in the songs of victory and loss. For the Arkenstone, you see, was more than a symbol of dwarven kingship. Some whispered that it held a power beyond gold and crowns, a light that could soften hearts, heal old wounds, and reveal paths hidden to the eye. Not power to rule, but power to understand. But such tales were buried beneath the weight of history, like moss covering ancient runes. What if the stone had fulfilled its true purpose? What if, instead of fueling Thorin Oakenshield's pride, it had been seen for what it truly was, a guide rather than a prize? Could it have changed everything? Tonight, we'll wander down that forgotten path, not in haste or urgency, but in quiet wonder. We'll walk through moonlit glades and misty forests, past silent watchstones and sleeping hills. Along the way, we'll meet those who remember the older stories, elves whose songs still speak of starlight, and perhaps even a familiar gray-cloaked wanderer who knows more than he says. If you find comfort in stories like this, feel free to linger in this corner of Middle-earth whenever sleep feels distant. A gentle tap to like or subscribe ensures that more such journeys await you, always ready when the night is long and the mind seeks solace. Among the green folds of the Shire that we find Bilbo Baggins, seated comfortably by the hearth in Bag End. His hair, once dark and curly, now bears the silver touch of passing years, and his face, though softened by age, still holds the thoughtful curiosity of a mind not easily satisfied by simple answers. Bilbo had long since returned from his grand adventure, the journey to Erebor, where he faced dragons and dwarves, riddles and treasure. But the years had passed quietly since then, filled with the small pleasures hobbits hold dear, good food, warm fires, and evenings spent with a book and a pipe. Yet, for all the peace that surrounded him, there remained a question that lingered like the last wisp of smoke from his pipe. What became of the Arkenstone? He had given it away, not as a prize, but as a hope, for peace, for reason, for hearts to soften before pride led to ruin. He had placed it into Bard's hands, thinking it might calm Thorin's growing obsession. And yet, after the battle was won and the mountains settled once more under dwarven rule, no word had ever come of the stone's fate. Most would have let the thought drift away, like a leaf upon a slow-moving stream. But Bilbo was, after all, a Baggins, and something of a Took as well, and Tookish curiosity, once stirred, is not easily soothed. So it was that Bilbo found himself once again studying an old map spread across his oak table, the firelight flickering over its faded lines. His fingers traced the winding path from the Shire to Erebor, pausing where the lonely mountain stood, crowned by inked peaks and surrounded by tiny runes. It was not treasure he sought, nor adventure. It was understanding, the quiet wish to know if the choice he had made all those years ago had truly changed anything. Outside, the moon rose higher, silvering the hilltops and casting long shadows along the road that led away from the Shire. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called softly, as if inviting him onward. Bilbo smiled to himself, shaking his head. "Foolish old hobbit," he murmured, though there was warmth in his voice, chasing moonlight and memories. But sometimes the quietest questions lead to the most unexpected answers. And so, with the soft creak of floorboards beneath his feet and the hush of night pressing gently against the windows, Bilbo began to gather a few things for the road ahead. The journey would not be long nor perilous, just a quiet walk into the past, guided by moonlight and an unanswered question. And perhaps, along the way, the heart of an old mystery would finally be revealed. The moon hung high over the Shire, casting silver light across the rolling hills and winding lanes. The world seemed to hold its breath, wrapped in the quiet peace of night. Most hobbits were tucked into their feathered beds, dreaming of breakfast and gardens. But in Bag End, a single window still glowed softly, its light flickering like a lone star on the hilltop. Inside, Bilbo Baggins stood by the hearth, staring at an old map spread across the oak table. The fire had burned low, and the room was filled with the faint scent of pipeweed and parchment. His finger traced the familiar path from the Shire to the lonely mountain, pausing where tiny runes marked Erebor's jagged peak. It had been years since his journey with Thorin Oakenshield and the company of dwarves. The memory, once sharp with excitement and danger, had softened like an old song hummed on a quiet evening. Yet, one note still lingered, a question that refused to fade. What became of the Arkenstone? Bilbo had surrendered it willingly, offering it to Bard in hopes of quelling Thorin's rising obsession. The choice had weighed on him at the time, but he had believed it was the right thing to do. And yet, after the battle was fought and Erebor reclaimed, the Arkenstone seemed to vanish from all tales. Most would have let the matter rest, but Bilbo was, at heart, both a Baggins and a Took. And Tookish curiosity, once stirred, was not easily soothed. The old hobbit sighed, tapping the map thoughtfully. He wasn't planning another grand adventure. Oh no, those days were long past. But a quiet journey, a gentle search for answers. That, perhaps, was worth a few days on the road. Bilbo glanced toward the mantel, where an unopened letter from Rivendell lay beneath an old silver bookmark. It had arrived weeks ago, carried by a wandering elf who spoke little but smiled often. Elrond's flowing script, elegant and precise, had caught Bilbo's eye immediately. The light you once held in your hands was more than mere stone. There are whispers among the wise that the Arkenstone, what the dwarves called the heart of the mountain, was not born of Erebor's depths, but of older light, captured long before the First Age. If peace did not claim it, then perhaps the land itself did, as starlight returns to the sky when the sun rises. Should your heart still wonder, follow the old paths eastward. Truth often lingers where the world forgets to look. Bilbo had read the letter countless times, each word settling into his mind like dew on grass. And now, standing in the warmth of his quiet home, he realized he could not ignore the gentle call of curiosity any longer. "Well," he muttered, brushing dust from his traveling cloak, "no harm in stretching one's legs, I suppose." The next morning dawned soft and golden, with mist curling along the edges of the Brandywine River. Bilbo, satchel faked with apples, cheese, and a small, leather-bound notebook, stepped onto the familiar path leading out of the Shire. His feet found the rhythm of the road easily, like greeting an old friend. The grass glistened with dew, and the air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and wildflowers. Birds stirred in the hedgerows, their morning songs weaving gently through the hush of dawn. Bilbo walked without hurry, his thoughts drifting like the clouds overhead. He passed through Bywater, where the mill wheel turned lazily, and skirted the edge of the green hills, where rabbits darted into the underbrush at his approach. But as the sun climbed higher, the landscape began to change. The tidy lanes and garden fences of the Shire gave way to open meadows and ancient woodlands. Here, the world felt older, untouched by the busy hands of hobbits. Moss-covered stones lined the path, some carved with faint runes, long weathered by wind and rain. Bilbo paused by one such stone, brushing his fingers across its cool surface. The markings were elvish, though worn almost to illegibility. He smiled faintly. "The road goes ever on and on," he murmured, recalling an old song from his wandering days. By the third day, Bilbo found himself in the western reaches of Eriador, where the hills rolled gently toward the distant mountains. The nights were cool, and the stars overhead seemed brighter, as though the sky itself watched his quiet journey. It was on one such evening, while resting beneath an ancient oak, that Bilbo first saw the light. Faint and flickering, it shimmered beyond the trees, like moonlight caught in water. He blinked, half convinced it was a trick of weary eyes, but the glow remained, soft, steady, and inviting. Curiosity stirred. Bilbo rose, brushing crumbs from his waistcoat, and followed the light into the woods. The path was narrow but clear, winding through tall beeches and whispering pines. The ground, covered in fallen leaves, muffled his steps. As he drew closer, the light resolved into something more defined, not a single source, but tiny motes of pale blue and silver, drifting like fireflies. They floated in a loose circle above a small stone, half buried in moss. Bilbo knelt, heart beating slow and steady. The stone was smooth and weathered, but faint runes glimmered along its edge, runes in the same flowing script as Elrond's letter. Moonlit paths reveal the heart's true desire. He frowned thoughtfully, tracing the words with one finger. The Arkenstone had been called the heart of the mountain, but if it was truly older than Erebor, could it have been something else before? The motes of light drifted higher, drawing his gaze along a barely visible trail leading eastward. Well, Bilbo sighed, adjusting his satchel. No sense turning back now. Days passed in quiet rhythm, the path leading Bilbo through gentle glades and shadowed hollows. He saw no other travelers, save for the occasional fox or deer, and the world around him seemed hushed, as though holding its breath. It was near dusk, with the sky streaked in shades of rose and indigo, when Bilbo stumbled upon the vale. The ground dipped gently, forming a hollow surrounded by tall birches whose white trunks glowed faintly in the fading light. At the center of the vale stood a ring of stones, ancient and moss-covered, yet still standing tall and proud. And there, at the heart of the circle, lay a single stone, smooth, pale, and faintly luminous, like moonlight made solid. Bilbo's breath caught. It was not the Arkenstone as he remembered it, not the brilliant, many-faceted gem Thorin had held aloft in the firelight. This was something quieter, gentler, a heart without its armor, a light freed from the weight of kingship and gold. Kneeling beside the stone, Bilbo reached out and brushed his fingers across its surface. The warmth that met his touch was not heat, but comfort, like the gentle warmth of sunlight on closed eyelids. And in that moment, understanding bloomed. The Arkenstone had never been meant for crowns or thrones. It had been a guide, a light to soften hearts, to reveal truth, to mend rather than divide. When Bilbo had handed it to Bard, he had unknowingly set it on the path it was always meant to follow, away from pride, toward peace. As night deepened, the stone's glow softened, fading into the silver hush of moonlight. Bilbo smiled, weariness slipping from his shoulders like an old cloak. The mystery, it seemed, had found its answer, not in grand declarations or treasure hoards, but in quiet understanding. Rising stiffly, he patted the stone affectionately, as one might an old friend. Well, you found your peace, it seems, and so have I. The path home, lit by starlight and memory, felt shorter than the road that had brought him here. The hills, the trees, even the wind seemed gentler, as though MiddleEarth itself had sighed in relief. By the time Bilbo crossed back into the Shire, dawn was breaking, painting the sky in soft gold and pale blue. The familiar scent of freshly baked bread drifted from nearby kitchens, and the grass sparkled with dew. Bag End stood just as he'd left it, round door, green garden, and the quiet promise of rest. As he stepped inside, Bilbo glanced once more toward the east, where the hills rolled away into the distance. Somewhere out there, the heart of an old mystery lay quietly at peace, its light no longer bound by mortal hands. The question that had stirred him from the comfort of Bag End, what became of the Arkenstone, now felt less like idle curiosity and more like the gentle pull of an old song, half remembered and waiting to be finished. It was not treasure Bilbo sought. He had no desire to see the gem locked away in a vault or held aloft like a trophy. No, His heart yearned for understanding. What had become of the light he had once held in his hands? Had it brought peace as he had hoped, or had it vanished like so many dreams swallowed by the passage of time? Bilbo's path led him into a forest older and quieter than any he had known. The trees here stood tall and proud, their trunks wide and gnarled with age. Moss covered the ground in a soft, springy carpet, and pale mushrooms glowed faintly in the dim underbrush. It was near twilight when Bilbo first heard it, a faint hum, like the echo of distant music drifting through the air. He paused, heart quickening, and tilted his head to listen. The sound was soft, almost like a lullaby, and it seemed to hum from deeper within the woods. Without a second thought, Bilbo followed, his feet moving quietly along the mossy path. As the light faded, the forest began to change. Tiny motes of pale blue light flickered among the branches, like starlight caught in the leaves. The air grew warmer, more comforting, as though the very earth welcomed his presence. Bilbo's fingers brushed against the bark of an ancient oak, and he smiled faintly. There was magic here, not the loud, commanding kind, but something older and gentler, like the hush of dawn or the first bloom of spring. The humming grew clearer as he walked, resolving into soft, wordless notes that rose and fell like the breath of the forest itself. And then, quite suddenly, the trees parted, revealing a small clearing bathed in moonlight. At the center of the clearing stood a single, smooth stone, pale as ivory and faintly luminous. Around it, wildflowers bloomed in shades of silver and lavender, their petals catching the moon's light like tiny mirrors. Bilbo's breath caught. It was not the Arkenstone as he remembered it, brilliant, many-faceted, like fire frozen in crystal. This was something quieter, more serene, a heart laid bare, stripped of its armor and pride. He stepped forward slowly, boots brushing through the soft grass. The warmth of the stone reached him before his fingers did, not heat, but a gentle comfort, like sunlight on a cool morning. And then, as his hand brushed the smooth surface, the humming ceased. Silence settled over the glade, deep and profound, as though the world itself held its breath. In that moment, memories rose unbidden. Thorin's fierce gaze as he held the Arkenstone aloft, Bard's quiet determination, the sorrowful silence after the battle of the 5 armies. And beneath it all, the choice Bilbo had made, to surrender the stone, not as a prize, but as a plea for peace. But there was something more, a truth long hidden, now revealed in the moon's gentle light. The Arkenstone, Silmathiel, as the elves had once named it, was never meant to crown a king or weigh down a treasure hoard. It had been a beacon, a guide for hearts willing to see beyond gold and power, a light to soften pride, mend old wounds, and reveal the path of understanding. Bilbo blinked, wonder stirring deep within him. The stone's brilliance had dimmed, not because it was lost, but because it had fulfilled its purpose. Freed from mortal desire, it had returned to what it had always been, a quiet light, guiding those who sought peace rather than power. As Bilbo knelt beside the stone, the soft crunch of leaves behind him drew his attention. He turned, half expecting a wandering deer or perhaps another curious traveler, but it was not an animal that stood at the edge of the glade. A tall figure, cloaked in gray and leaning lightly on a staff, watched him with eyes that glimmered like starlight beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Gandalf," Bilbo breathed, surprise melting into quiet relief. The wizard smiled, stepping into the moonlight. "Well met, my dear Bilbo. I had a feeling I'd find you here." Bilbo chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Of course you did. You always seem to know where the interesting paths lead." Gandalf approached, his gaze falling on the pale stone at the heart of the glade. He nodded slowly, as though confirming an old suspicion. "So," Bilbo murmured, "it was never truly a treasure, was it? Not in the way Thorin believed." "No," Gandalf replied, voice gentle. "It was a gift, one meant not to rule, but to guide. The dwarves saw only its brilliance, a crown jewel for a king, but its true power lay in what it revealed, not what it possessed." Bilbo sighed, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "And now, what becomes of it?" Gandalf smiled, eyes twinkling, nothing more than what it is. "A light for those who walk quietly, who seek not to claim, but to understand. The world no longer wars for it, and so it rests, exactly as it was meant to." They sat together for a time, two old friends beneath the watchful gaze of the stars. The stone's glow softened, like a candle burning low, content to fade into the background of the night. Bilbo found himself smiling, a warmth spreading in his chest. The question that had driven him from Bag End, the restless curiosity that had stirred his heart, now settled into quiet satisfaction. "It's strange," he mused aloud. "I thought finding the stone would feel like closure, like finishing an old chapter, but it doesn't. It feels more like waking from a pleasant dream, only to realize the day ahead is just as peaceful." Gandalf nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "Such is often the way of true understanding. It does not end a journey, but gently reshapes it, leaving the heart lighter and the mind clearer." Bilbo chuckled, patting his knees as he stood. "Well, I suppose that's enough wandering for one old hobbit. Time to head home, I think. My chair by the fire must be wondering where I've gone." The wizard smiled, rising with him. "A wise choice, my friend. Even the most curious hearts must rest, and home, home is the greatest treasure of all." As they walked back through the forest, the moon high overhead, Bilbo found his steps lighter than they had been in years. The Arkenstone's fate was no longer a mystery, nor a regret. It had not been lost, only transformed, freed from the weight of mortal ambition, left to shine quietly for those who walked the gentler paths of Middle-earth. The road led them westward, through meadows silvered by moonlight and hills soft with mist. And as the first light of dawn touched the sky, the familiar green slopes of the Shire came into view. Bilbo paused at the edge of the woods, glancing back toward the east, where the glade lay hidden beyond sight. "Do you think anyone else will ever find it?" he asked quietly. Gandalf smiled, resting a hand on Bilbo's shoulder. "Perhaps, but only those who seek not to own, but to understand. And such folk, my dear Bilbo, are rare and precious indeed." They stood a moment longer, the world hushed around them, Then, with a satisfied sigh, Bilbo adjusted his satchel and turned toward home. The sky had faded into a soft indigo as Bilbo and Gandalf made their way from the moonlit glade. The Arkenstone, or rather Silmathiel, as the elves once named it, rested quietly where it belonged, no longer a prize to be fought over, but a light return to peace. The forest around them seemed to share in that calm, the leaves barely stirring in the gentle night breeze. Bilbo walked in thoughtful silence, the question that had drawn him from Bag End now answered. Yet, as often happens when one answer is found, other curiosities began to stir. "Gandalf," Bilbo said quietly, stepping carefully over a mossy root, "if the Arkenstone was never truly a dwarven gem, how did it end up in Erebor? Surely Durin the Deathless didn't simply stumble upon starlight while digging for gold." The wizard chuckled softly, the glow of his pipe flickering like a tiny firefly in the dim light. "Ah, now, there's a tale older than most care to remember. The dwarves believed the stone was shaped in the heart of the mountain, a gift from the earth itself. But the elves, they sang a different story." Bilbo glanced up, curiosity rekindled. "Well, don't leave an old hobbit hanging. What did the elves say?" Gandalf smiled, eyes twinkling beneath the brim of his hat. "They spoke of the First Age, long before the shaping of the mountains, you know. It was said that Varda, the Queen of the Stars, caught a fragment of light from Arundel's Silmaril as it sailed across the sky. That shard fell to Middle-earth, not like a shooting star, but as a quiet ember drifting down like a snowflake until it settled into the earth. For centuries, it lay untouched, hidden beneath roots and stone, until a wandering craftsman, a child of men, not dwarf nor elf, found it while sheltering from a storm in the northern hills. He carried it not as treasure, but as a comfort, for the stone gave off a warmth that eased weariness and softened sorrow. Over time, it passed from hand to hand, each bearer finding solace in its light, until it was lost again, buried beneath shifting earth and forgotten paths. It was Durin the Deathless who stumbled upon it deep within Erebor, and, seeing only its brilliance, named it the Heart of the Mountain. Bilbo nodded slowly, the tale settling into his mind like an old puzzle piece falling into place. So it was never truly theirs, just another wanderer passing through many hands. "Indeed," Gandalf said, puffing thoughtfully on his pipe. "Like many great things in this world, it belonged to no one and everyone. Its true power was never in possession, but in what it revealed, hearts softened, truths uncovered, paths made clear." They walked on, the path winding gently through the forest. The moon had climbed higher now, casting pale light upon the trail. In the distance, the faint sound of water reached their ears, a stream perhaps, or a hidden spring. As they descended into a shallow valley, the trees grew older, their trunks wide and weathered, like silent guardians of ancient secrets. The air here felt different, cooler, quieter, as though the world itself held its breath. Bilbo paused, brushing his hand along the mossy bark of an ancient oak. "This place, it feels untouched, like time forgot it." Gandalf nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Not forgotten, protected, there are places in Middle-earth where the past lingers more keenly, where memory clings to stone and root. This is one such place. They followed the sound of water, the soft gurgle growing louder, until they reached a small clearing where a narrow stream wound its way through the grass. The moonlight danced on the water's surface, and beside the stream stood a figure, cloaked and hooded, as still as the trees themselves. Bilbo froze, heart quickening, but before worry could take hold, the figure turned, lowering its hood to reveal a face, both fair and ancient, framed by hair like spun silver. "An elf," Bilbo whispered, eyes widening. The elf smiled, stepping forward with the grace of one who walks not upon earth, but upon moonbeams. "Well met, Gandalf," the elf said, voice soft and melodic, "and to you, Master Baggins. It is rare to see a hobbit wandering these paths." Gandalf inclined his head. "Eleanor, it has been many years." Bilbo blinked, surprised. "You know each other?" The elf, Eleanor, chuckled quietly, in the way all wanderers know each other, across paths long forgotten and stories half told. "I keep watch over these lands, where the echoes of older days still linger." Her gaze drifted to the west, where the glade of Silmathiel lay hidden beyond the hills. "I felt the light stir, if only for a moment. The moonstone has found peace once more, I think." Bilbo nodded. "Yes, it's no longer a prize to be fought over, just what it was always meant to be, a light for those who seek peace, not power." Eleanor's smile deepened, and she gestured for them to follow. "Come, there is more to this tale than the stone itself. The paths of light often lead to older truths, ones forgotten even by those who walk the long years." They followed the elf along a narrow trail that wound beside the stream, the water glimmering faintly in the moonlight. The forest opened into another clearing, this one ringed by tall standing stones, weathered and cracked but still proud. In the center stood a stone basin filled with water that shimmered like liquid silver. "This," Eleanor said quietly, "is one of the Miralinda, the star pools of old. They are few now, scattered and hidden, but once they were places of reflection, where light revealed not what is, but what might have been." Bilbo stepped closer, peering into the water's smooth surface. At first, he saw only the reflection of the moon, but as the ripples settled, shapes began to form. He saw Erebor, its gates wide and golden, beneath the sun. Thorin Oakenshield stood there, crownless but smiling, his hand clasped with bards in friendship. Beyond them, dwarves and men worked side by side, rebuilding Dale with laughter. Instead of sorrow, Bilbo's breath caught. That could have been, if Thorin had seen the Arkenstone as more than a treasure. Eleanor nodded solemnly. The stone was not merely light, but possibility. It revealed the heart's truest desire, unclouded by pride or fear. In another time, another choice, peace might have come sooner, without bloodshed. The image shifted, showing the stone itself, not in the halls of Erebor, but nestled among wildflowers in a quiet glade, just as Bilbo had found it. "But," Eleanor continued, "fate is ever-changing, like water flowing around stone, though one path was lost, Another was found. The stone now rests, not as a symbol of dominion, but as a light for those who walk gently upon the earth, and through it, peace endures. Bilbo watched the images fade, his heart both heavy and light. It seems the world always offers a second chance, if only we're willing to see it. Gandalf smiled, eyes crinkling at the corners. Indeed, my dear Bilbo, and few are wise enough to take that chance when it comes. They lingered a while longer in the clearing, sharing quiet stories under the moon's gentle gaze. Elenor spoke of other lights long vanished, gems not of gold or silver, but of memory and song, scattered across Middle-earth like petals on the wind. At last, as dawn's first light touched the eastern sky, Elenor rose, her cloak shimmering like dew on spring grass. Your road now turns homeward, Master Baggins, she said softly. But know this, the peace you sought was never truly in the stone itself. It was in the choice you made long ago to value understanding over possession, kindness over pride. That choice has shaped more lives than you will ever know. Bilbo smiled, warmth spreading in his chest. Well, I suppose an old hobbit can rest easy, knowing he didn't bungle things too badly. Elenor chuckled, stepping back into the shadows of the wood. Rest easy indeed, Bilbo Baggins, and may your heart remain ever light, like starlight upon the water. The path back to the Shire felt shorter than the road that had led him away. The hills grew greener, the air sweeter, as though Middle-earth itself sighed in quiet relief. As they crested the final rise, Bag End came into view, its round door painted bright green, the garden bursting with late summer blooms. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and the faint sound of Sam Gamgee whistling as he tended the roses reached Bilbo's ears. He paused, glancing eastward one last time. Somewhere beyond those hills, the moonstone lay quietly, its light no longer bound by greed or ambition, and though the world might forget it in time, the peace it had restored would endure in the hearts of those wise enough to seek it. Gandalf, standing beside him, rested a hand on Bilbo's shoulder. Well, my dear hobbit, it seems you've found more than an answer. You've found peace, not just for the stone, but for yourself. Bilbo nodded, smiling softly. Yes, and that, I think, is the finest treasure of all. With a final glance at the brightening sky, Bilbo turned toward home, his heart light, his mind at ease. The journey had ended, but the peace it brought would linger long after the road had faded behind him. And so, as the sun rose over the Shire, the tale of the Arkenstone, Silmathiel, the Moonlit Jewel, came to its quiet close, not with battle or coronation, but with understanding, friendship, and the gentle promise that light, once freed, will always find its way home. The sun hung low on the horizon as Bilbo and Gandalf followed the winding trail out of the forest. The trees, ancient and silent, stood like watchful sentinels, their leaves gilded by the fading light. Though the path was familiar now, Bilbo's heart was lighter, his steps more assured. The burden of unanswered questions had slipped away like mist under the morning sun. They had seen the truth. The Arkenstone, or Silmathiel, as the elves called it, was never meant to rest beneath Erebor's gold. It had been a light for those who sought peace, not power. Freed from mortal ambition, it had found its place once more, not as a prize, but as a quiet reminder of what might have been and what still could be. Bilbo glanced at Gandalf, who walked beside him, staff tapping softly against the earth. The wizard's expression was thoughtful, his gaze distant, as though he too was turning over quiet revelations in his mind. "So," Bilbo said, breaking the silence, "the Arkenstone's purpose was never to crown a king. It was to reveal truth, to soften hearts. Thorin never saw that, did he?" Gandalf sighed, his eyes softening. "No, my dear Bilbo. Thorin, like many before him, saw only the brilliance of the stone, not the wisdom it offered. Pride can cloud even the clearest light. But you saw its true worth, not as treasure, but as a chance for peace." Bilbo nodded slowly. The choice he had made, all those years ago, to give the stone to Bard rather than keep it for himself or return it to Thorin, it had been an act not of defiance, but of hope. And now, seeing where that choice had led, he felt a quiet satisfaction settle in his chest. They crested a small hill, and beyond it, the land opened into a wide, moonlit valley. At its heart lay the glade where the Arkenstone had come to rest, nestled among wildflowers and soft grass. The light that had once blazed like fire now glowed gently, like the last embers of a hearth on a peaceful night. As they approached the glade, Bilbo slowed, his breath catching. The stone lay untouched, its surface smooth and cool, shimmering faintly in the twilight. But there was something different now, a sense of completion, as though the land itself had embraced the stone, recognizing it not as an intruder, but as an old friend returned home. Gandalf knelt beside the stone, brushing his fingers lightly across its surface. The runes that once marked it, faint elvish words of peace and protection, now glimmered softly, like moonlight succoed in still water. "The heart of the mountain," Gandalf murmured, "return to the heart of the earth, not to rule, but to rest." Bilbo stood quietly, hands clasped behind his back. He had expected to feel sorrow, perhaps, or regret for what might have been if Thorin had seen the stone for what it truly was. But instead, there was only peace, the gentle understanding that some stories end not with triumph or tragedy, but with quiet acceptance. "Do you think anyone else will ever find it?" Bilbo asked softly. Gandalf smiled, rising to his feet. "Only those who seek not treasure, but truth. And such folk are rare, my dear Hobbit, rare and precious." They lingered in the glade as night fell, the stars kindling overhead like tiny lanterns in the vast sky. Bilbo, seated comfortably on a mossy stone, found his thoughts drifting, not toward the past, but toward home. Bag End, with its round green door and cozy hearth. The scent of fresh bread drifting from the kitchen, the rustle of leaves in the garden where Samwise Gamgee often tended the roses with quiet dedication. It was time to return. The road had given him answers, but home was the heart of all things, the place where peace truly lived. Gandalf seemed to sense Bilbo's thoughts, for he smiled and tapped his staff lightly against the ground. "Come, my friend, the moon will guide us westward, and the Shire awaits. You've found what you came for. There's no need to linger where the heart has already spoken." Bilbo nodded, rising with a soft grunt and brushing dust from his coat. He cast one last glance at the moonstone, now barely more than a pale glow amid the grass. "Rest well," he murmured. "You've earned it." The journey back was quieter, softer. The land itself seemed gentler, as though the peace that had settled in Bilbo's heart had spread outward, touching every hill and hollow along the way. They passed through moonlit glades and crossed shallow streams that sparkled like silver ribbons under the stars. Bilbo found himself humming an old walking song, the words rising easily, like bubbles in a spring. "The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began." Gandalf chuckled quietly. "Still singing that old tune, are we?" Bilbo smiled. "Well, it served me well enough, and now it feels less like a lament and more like a promise. The road may go on, but it always leads home in the end." The hills of the Shire rose gently before them as dawn painted the sky in hues of rose and gold. The first wisps of chimney smoke curled upward from hobbit holes nestled among the green slopes, and the faint sound of a rooster's crow drifted on the breeze. Baggins stood just as Bilbo had left it, round door, tidy garden, and the comforting sense of familiarity that only home can bring. Bilbo paused at the gate, hand resting lightly on the wooden latch. He glanced back, eastward, where the road wound away into the distance, disappearing among the hills. "Funny thing, Gandalf," he said softly. "I left home chasing an old question, thinking I'd find closure in knowing what became of the Arkenstone. But now, standing here, I realize the answer was never truly about the stone. It was about peace. Peace in knowing that some lights are meant to guide, not to be held." Gandalf nodded, eyes twinkling. "Wisely spoken, my dear Bilbo. The greatest treasures are those that lighten the heart, not weigh it down. And you, I think, have found the finest treasure of all." With a satisfied sigh, Bilbo pushed open the gate and stepped onto the familiar path leading to his front door. The grass, damp with morning dew, brushed against his boots, and the scent of freshly baked bread drifted from the neighboring hobbit holes. Home. As he reached the door, Bilbo paused, turning once more to the east. Somewhere beyond those hills, the Arkenstone, no longer a crown jewel, but a quiet light, rested in peace, its purpose fulfilled. "Goodbye, old friend," Bilbo whispered, voice soft as the breeze. "May your light shine quietly for those wise enough to see it." And with that, he stepped inside, closing the round door behind him with the softest of clicks. The fire in the hearth crackled gently, casting flickering shadows along the walls. His chair, worn but comfortable, awaited by the fireside, a book resting open on the side table. Bilbo smiled, sinking into the chair with a contented sigh. The journey was done. The road, ever winding, had led him home. And as the sun rose higher, painting Bag End in warm golden light, Bilbo Baggins dozed off, his heart light, his mind at peace. Outside, the world moved quietly on, unaware of the small, gentle victory won, not with swords or crowns, but with an understanding, kindness, and the wisdom to let go. For the greatest power of all, Bilbo realized as sleep embraced him, was not to hold light, but to follow it, to trust that in the end, it would always lead home. Bilbo Baggins stood at the edge of his garden, hands tucked into the pockets of his well-worn coat. From here, he could see the winding path that led eastward, the road he had taken not so long ago, chasing a question that had lingered in his heart for years. But now, the question was answered. The Arkenstone, Silmathiel, the Moonlit Jewel, had found its peace, no longer bound by mortal ambition or pride. It lay quietly in its glade, not as a prize, but as a light returned to its true purpose, to guide, to reveal, and to soften hearts willing to see beyond gold and crowns. Bilbo smiled faintly, his gaze following the path until it vanished among the hills. He no longer felt the restless pull that had stirred him from Bag End. The road had given him what he needed, not just answers, but understanding. Turning from the garden, Bilbo made his way back to the round green door of Bag End. The house, bathed in warm morning light, stood as it always had, tidy, welcoming, and filled with the quiet comforts of home. Inside, the fire crackled softly in the hearth, its warmth spreading through the cozy sitting room. A kettle hummed on the stove, and the faint scent of fresh bread drifted from the kitchen. It was a morning like any other in the Shire, simple, unremarkable, and yet, to Bilbo, it felt like the sweetest treasure of all. He settled into his favorite chair by the fire, a well-loved book resting on his lap. But instead of reading, his gaze drifted to the window, where the sky stretched pale and clear above the hills. Funny thing, he murmured to himself, how peace never comes from holding on, but from letting go. He had let go of the Arkenstone once, long ago, hoping it might bring understanding to a heart clouded by pride. And now he had let go of the need to know its fate, trusting that light, once freed, would always find its way home. And so it had. As the morning wore on, Bilbo's thoughts wandered like leaves floating down a quiet stream. He thought of Thorin Oakenshield, proud, fierce, but not without warmth. Had Thorin seen the stone as Bilbo had, perhaps his end might have been gentler, but even pride, Bilbo knew, could not dim the love Thorin held for his kin. And now, the light that once stirred such turmoil had returned to peace, no longer bound by the ambitions of kings or the weight of gold. It shone quietly in a hidden glade, seen only by those who walked the older paths, not as seekers of treasure, but as wanderers following the gentle pull of curiosity and wonder. Bilbo smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. He had followed that path, not knowing where it would lead, and found not only answers, but a renewed appreciation for the life he had built. The kettle whistled softly, pulling Bilbo from his reverie. He rose with a contented sigh, padding across the warm wooden floor to pour himself a cup of tea. The steam curled upward, catching the sunlight that streamed through the kitchen window. As he stirred in a spoonful of honey, Bilbo glanced toward the small shelf near the mantel. There, among the books and trinkets, collected over a lifetime of quiet adventures, lay a single smooth stone, not the Arkenstone itself, but a pale river stone he had picked up on his way home, its surface worn soft by time and water. It was a reminder, not of treasure found, but of peace reclaimed. A simple thing, unremarkable to any but him, yet more valuable than gold or jewels. Carrying his tea back to the fireside, Bilbo sank into his chair once more, stretching his legs toward the warm hearth. The fire crackled gently, the flames flickering like the last light of a fading dream. Outside, the Shire stirred to life. Children laughed as they chased one another along the lane, and the distant sound of a blacksmith's hammer rang softly from the village. The world moved on, as it always did, unaware of the quiet victories won in glades far from bustling streets and crowded halls. Bilbo closed his eyes, the warmth of the tea spreading through him like sunlight after rain. He did not need to hold the Arkenstone to know its light endured. It lived not in vaults or crowns, but in choices made with kindness, in roads taken not for glory, but for understanding. And as he drifted into a gentle, peaceful sleep, the last thought that crossed his mind was not of distant mountains or long-forgotten treasure, but of home, the greatest gift of all. The story is done, my sleepy fellows. The road has led us home, not with fanfare or triumph, but with the quiet satisfaction of a heart at peace. May your own journeys, whether long or short, always lead you back to warmth, comfort, and rest. Sleep well, and may the light of understanding, like the soft glow of Silmathiel, guide your dreams until morning comes.